Hello and welcome back. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about happiness, which is a large portion of the title of this class, and we're finally getting to it in chapter 7. All right, so what are some of the benefits of being happy? That's a fun thought question, isn't it? Why is it good to be happy? um, well, one thing that we know about happy people is that those who are feeling good tend to do good, which I'm not sure is grammatically correct, but let's just go with it. And they also tend to live good. Okay, I know that's not grammatical. So obviously we're trying to have a nice symmetry with feel good, do good, live good. We will go across this chapter talking about some of the ways in which happy people do better works, behave in better ways. And we'll also talk about how happiness is associated with living a better life in general. But let's talk about some specificity, some specific examples. For one thing, we know that people who are happier tend to be healthier. They tend to live longer lives, and as they're living those longer lives, they tend to be healthier within them. They tend to be more productive. They tend to enjoy a higher income, probably as a result of that greater productivity. They tend to leave more marks on the future, so their generativity is more likely to be met. They tend to be more tolerant. Happy people are more willing to accept variations in other people's behaviors without concern. They don't get bound up in trying to demand that other people do this or that. They spend their time experiencing their own lives rather than bothering about other people's lives. They tend to be more creative. They're able to express their own creativity. They're able to respond to prompts with more creative responses. They make decisions more easily. They don't get bound up in everyday little, what should I have for dinner? Where should we go for that event? What should I wear today? They're less likely to get super bogged down in that and are more readily able to just make a decision and go with it. When they are setting their own goals, they tend to select challenging ones. We talked about that in a couple of chapters ago, the idea that people who select more challenging goals tend to have higher achievement motivation. They persist longer when they are confronted with difficulty. In some ways, a happy person can be a little bit overly happy, and they might persist even longer than they should. Like, remember the example I gave a few chapters ago where I talked about how people who are depressed will recognize the hopelessness of a, sort of random situation, and they'll stop trying to control it. Whereas a person who's happy will actually persist longer. So, persistence is great. Persisting in the face of futility maybe isn't so great. They tend to perform better in lab tasks. So when given cognitive tasks or puzzles or different kinds of math problems and things like that, they tend to perform better. Happy people tend to perform better than people who aren't happy. Sometimes, by the way, in those lab tests, they'll induce happiness versus people who are in a neutral mood, or they'll induce happiness versus somebody who's been induced into a negative mood. So it doesn't have to always be sort of your walking around mood. It could be a mood that you've been induced into. They tend to show more empathy for not only their close friends, but also towards probably their romantic partners, so that they end up with better marriages as a result. So by showing empathy, by showing understanding, by putting themselves in someone else's place, it tends to have benefits for friendships and romantic relationships. All right, so that's a pretty long list of good outcomes that are associated with happiness. We haven't yet defined what happiness is, have we? Well, we're still not going to yet. So here we'll see people rating their mood on a scale from -5 to +5, with 0 being neutral. And so we still haven't defined exactly what they're experiencing here, but you're leaning negative, you're leaning positive, or you're neutral. And what you'll see is that, so you've got waking up is 0 on the left-hand side of the x-axis, and then 16, sorry, I forgot to mute my phone, 16 hours of wakefulness happening across the x-axis. So immediately upon waking up, you see that people tend to go from a fairly negative mood to a semi-positive mood pretty quickly. Within an hour of waking, people tend to be in a reasonably positive mood. And that positivity tends to increase up to about, probably for most people, lunchtime kind of thing. Not necessarily noon, but about the time that they would be eating maybe their second meal of the day. And then it starts to go back down again as they approach bedtime. And so it's kind of flat and stable for the bulk of the normal waking hours. I've been awake for 2 hours, I've been awake for about 11 hours. That's pretty consistently, positive and stable. And then once we get past that 11 hours of wakefulness, it starts to go down, and that may be a prelude to getting ready to fall asleep. I'm feeling less positive as the afternoon and evening are going on. And again, this is relative to when you woke up, not necessarily what time of day. So if you're an early morning person, 1 hour of having been awake might be 7 a.m. If you're more of an afternoon person, 1 hour of wakefulness might be 1 p.m., right? I mean, people vary on when they woke up, but this pattern was very consistent where people are in a relatively positive mood for about 11 hours of their day, and then it starts to go down a little bit. That positivity starts to go down a little bit. And you'll notice in the blue line, the negative emotion, it's flat. It's, people tend to report not much negative emotion for most of the day. And then you get a little spike at about the same moment when the positive emotion started to go down. They're like, I'm starting to feel cranky, or I'm not feeling great. And it may, again, be one of those factors that helps to propel us towards maybe we need some sleep. And so maybe we stay up a few more hours scrolling our phones or watching TV or checking out some YouTube videos. So maybe we're studying. But the longer we stay up, the longer that sort of stable level of negative mood, that negative emotion that we're seeing on the from hour 13 to 16 after waking up, that's the longer that goes on. So it looks like after that little spike in negative emotion, it goes down a little bit, but then it kind of stays stable again, maybe as a motivation to get us to go to sleep. All right, so I like to share with you paradoxes in this class that, sometimes we think, oh, it's great to have whatever the trait or characteristic that we're talking about. I talked about the paradox of choice, so it's so great to have choice. It's so great to be happy. Like, these are good things, but is it purely good? Right? Is it purely good to be happy? Well, of course, we have some research on that, and seeking our own happiness might actually paradoxically reduce our happiness. The more we're trying to find ways to actually make ourselves feel better and to get ourselves into a state of positive emotion, the harder it may be to actually enter that state of happiness. So I had you do a little exercise for this week where you thought of 10 people who you know, and you put it into a spreadsheet, did a little, discussing with your classmates about it. I'm going to process that data and make a little video about it because it relates to this topic. And I'll put it next in the playlist. So it's going to be a little bit out of order contextually, but I'll put it into this playlist so that you can check out this paradox of happiness. Because one of the questions was, think of people who are selfish and people who are unselfish. And it turns out that, a person who we label as selfish, it's unlikely that we also think of them as happy, because on average, people who are selfish experience more negative emotions and certainly engage in more negative behaviors. People who are less selfish tend to do good works, helping other people, contributing to other people's happiness. And that in turn tends to boost their own happiness, but in a way that is they weren't seeking that happiness. And so then that happiness is actually a better happiness, or a more stable happiness. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind, right? That if you want to be happy, it's not about seeking that out yourself. It might be about actually doing things that would put you outside yourself, that would make it the most likely that you would be happy. So that's a really important message. All right. So is there an illusory correlation between the idea of people who are happy engaging in more beneficial behaviors? Are we thinking that people who are happy are more selfless? Are we just thinking that and we're seeing it, and it's not actually really correlated, let alone causally related? Is that possible? Maybe. Both the concept of selflessness and the concept of happiness, these are both socially desirable things, right? Like, it's something that people strive to be, or would like to be thought of as happy people, and would like to be thought of as selfless people, right? Like, these are socially desirable things. And so we might see people that we like as possessing both traits, when in fact, maybe they don't really possess both of the traits, or either of the traits, or maybe they have one of the traits in a big amount and the other trait maybe in a much smaller amount. But because we like them, we're just saying that they have it, that they go together, and that being selfless contributes to happiness. Like, maybe this is all just a big, fat, illusory correlation, and we're misinterpreting things. So if we, instead of us observing, like I had you do for the discussion, instead of us observing and naming people and thinking whether they're selfish or not, they did a study where they had people self-rate their happiness and then also their own selflessness. And the researchers did find a positive correlation for males. So that means that males who rated themselves as happier also rated themselves as more selfless. Those who rated themselves as less happy also rated themselves as less selfless, maybe more selfish. There was no correlation found by Feingold in 1983 for females. So females didn't seem to self-report in a way that would lead to the conclusion that happy females are also the more selfless females. So if there is a correlation, maybe it's largely being carried by the males. In the research, maybe mostly males are the happy and selfless combination, and females, they're just sort of like, that doesn't go together at all. And so we're ending up with what appears to be a correlation for everybody, but it's really for the males. Maybe that's what's going on. Or maybe the way that females fill out the scale is causing it to look like there's no correlation for the females when there really is. A lot of selfless behaviors are things that fall into the female purview of things to do, like make lunches for other people, do laundry for other people, clean houses for other people. Like, these are a lot of times like just sort of on average more common female behaviors. And so maybe the reason why there's no correlation for females is because females are doing a lot of selfless behaviors, and some females are probably more happy than other females are. And so, but they're all doing more of these behaviors than males are. You know what I mean? There's just a lot of things that need to be sussed out on this, this relationship between happiness and selflessness. So I thought I'd wrap up by having you take a scale, and then we can come back after you see my video on the selfishness thing, and then continue on with what this means. So let's just take the scale first. All right. So this is going to be the Orientations to Happiness scale. And so you can rate your responses from 1 to 7. 1 means that you strongly disagree. 7 means you strongly agree. And you do have a neutral in this. So you are allowed to put a 4 if you're literally thinking, I want to be neutral. All right. So number 1, regardless of what I am doing, time passes very quickly. Regardless of what I am doing, time passes very quickly. Again, as always with these little scales, it's more fun if you play along and get your score at the end. So I'd encourage you to play along, write the stuff down, and we'll score it at the end. This is not in your ebook. So I'm inserting this in. All right, number 2, my life serves a higher purpose. Rate the degree to which you agree that your life serves a higher purpose. I'll go kind of fast because you can always pause me. Okay, life is too short to postpone the pleasures it can provide. 4, I seek out situations that challenge my skills and abilities. 5, in choosing what I do, I always take into account whether it will benefit other people. 6, whether at work or play, I am usually in a zone and not conscious of myself. 7, I am always very absorbed in what I do. 8, I go out of my way to feel euphoric. 9, in choosing what to do, I always take into account whether I can lose myself in it. 10, I am rarely distracted by what is going on around me. 11, I have a responsibility to make the world a better place. 12, my life has a lasting meaning. 13, in choosing what to do, I always take into account whether it will be pleasurable. 14, what I do matters to society. 15, I agree with this statement. Life is short, eat dessert first. 16, I love to do things that excite my senses. 17, I have spent a lot of time thinking about what life means and how I fit into its big picture. 18, for me, the good life is the pleasurable life. All right, so that was your orientations to happiness scale. If you need to back up, whatever, go ahead and make sure you have answers to all 18 items because now we're going to score it. So first we're going to compute your score on the scale called the pleasure scale. So you're going to sum up your ratings for items 3, 8, 13, 15, 16, and 18. So add all of those ratings that you gave for those 6 items into one big number that will serve as your pleasure scale score. Scale 2 is your engagement score, and you're going to sum up your ratings for items 1, 4, 6, 7, 9, and 10. And then the final scale is the meaning scale, and you're going to sum up your ratings for items 2, 5, 11, 12, 14, and 17. So if you want to pause me for a second and sum up the 6 items of each scale and get one big total score, I'll tell you what those mean when you come back. All right, if you pause me, hopefully you now have 3 scores in hand, and I'm going to go over what they mean. All right, so the pleasure scale is a measure of what's called hedonism, and that's a word that means pursuing pleasure. So hedonism, you might have learned about it in history, was a term that referred to a culture that, ate, gastronomically, like the best things they could. Supposedly they ate, then they would like tickle the back of their throat and throw up so they could eat again. And like that, they were like just really into, the pleasure of eating, the pleasure of like sexual activities. And like, they were just all about pleasures of the flesh, basically. And so you might have a maybe not super flattering association with the word hedonism if you're familiar with that old, historical culture. But that's not necessarily what's meant by the scale. Hedonism is just referring to the pursuit of pleasure, not necessarily to, excess. But looking for pleasurable experiences would be part of your concept of happiness if you're scoring high on this scale. If you scored high on the engagement scale, it's much more about being true to yourself, developing your best, being able to serve others. So the engagement scale is about, you would be happy if you were reaching your fullest potential kind of thing. Not in an achievement orientation way, but more in a self-actualization kind of, think about it like that it's about becoming your best self. And then the meaning scale, is very similar to Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow, where you're looking for those situations where the challenges of the situation match your abilities, so that your sense of self gets lost, you get swept away, all those things that we talked about in the last chapter. So wanting to enter a flow state would be like your definition of happiness if you scored highest on the meaning scale. All of these are positively correlated with each other. So, a high score on pleasure tends to be associated with a higher score on engagement. A higher score on engagement tends to be positively correlated with a higher score on meaning. And then, pleasure and meaning also, high scores on one are correlated with high scores on the other. So all of these are positively correlated. Happiness might be defined as, by some people as being, a mixture of engagement and meaning, right? Others might call this a full life, right? If you had high scores on all three, you have a full life where you're seeking out pleasure, you're seeking out engagement, you're seeking out flow experiences. Like you're well-rounded in your pursuit of happiness, and that having a low score on all three would imply that, none of these is motivating you. And so the researchers called this an empty life, because you're not motivated by any of the things that might actually make you happy. So looking at your scale score, you might be thinking, okay, but what's a high score? Well, this is one of those scales where they don't define what a high score is or what a low score is. They don't say that if you're above this, then you are considered high. All they have ever done is compared people who are on the higher numbers to those in the lower numbers, and not really ever defined like categories within each scale. So keep that in mind, that you can look at your score and say, well, there were 6 items and the highest score you could give each one is 7. So we're looking at, if I'm closer to 42 than I am to 7, which would be the lowest score you could possibly get on a 6 would be the lowest score you could possibly get on a scale. I'm closer to 42 than 6, then I would call myself high. But then you might say, what's 20? Right? Smack in the middle. That's smack in the middle. And probably the researchers would not even use you as one of their subjects because you were in the middle. So downside of scales. These are usually designed for research, and, really they are most interested in people who are high and people who are low. And that's why I always try to encourage you not to use the 4 if you can avoid it, right? Because then you're in the middle, and then we throw out your score because you're too middle. So in other words, take this orientation to happiness scale for your own score numbers with a grain of salt, but take this, maybe this idea to heart, that there's 3 different kinds of orientations to happiness. I'm pursuing pleasure, I'm pursuing engagement, I'm pursuing meaning, and any combination thereof. Like, you might be high on all 3, you might be low on all 3, but you could be high on 2 and low on 1. And that gives us another, 1, 2, 3. That gives us another 3 different orientations, right? Because what if you're high on pleasure and engagement and kind of lower on meaning, or you're higher on engagement and meaning, kind of lower on pleasure? So there are a lot of different ways to be oriented towards happiness, is what I would like you to walk away from this thinking or knowing. All right, so go ahead and watch my video on the selfishness and happiness outcome for our data, and then I will see you back for the next segment.